A while ago, I posted a video of this effect that I made in Resolume Wire, which I made for a techno festival. And I got some question about a tutorial on this, and I thought that's actually a good topic because it's a very basic effect, but it really covers the basics of wire. And let me just demonstrate the effect itself quickly, and then we'll jump in on how to actually create it. So you can see that the effect is loaded up here. You can find it in the sources. And once you load it, you have these dancing lines is what I called it. You can set the amount of lines, so you can have 1, 2, or 3 basically. You have a thickness value, so you can change the thickness of the lines. And then you can also kind of create this smoothing effect. And you have one boolean for horizontal lines, like a toggle, and one for vertical lines. So you can either play them both or just one of them. And I think this goes very well with like techno because it's beat synced to kind of the 16th note, so it goes well on like the hi-hats and stuff like that. So yeah, works quite nicely. And so let's jump into Wire to see how it's made. Actually, the patch itself is very simple, but I'm just gonna start a new one so we can build it all from scratch. First thing we want to do is add a line, right? So I'm just gonna double click in empty space, look for the line. And by default, this will be this diagonal line because it already has this preset beginning and end points. But I want a horizontal one. So for the Y values, I can set both of those to 0. So now it's horizontal, and I just want to increase the range. So -2 and 2 is something where I know that it will be outside of the bounds, so it will just cover the entire screen. And then we also have the thickness, which we will access later, right? So now I want to transform this line, right? So I'm just gonna click and drag from the output here. I'm gonna look for the transform. And this translation values here are the ones that I want to kind of randomly access, matching to the beat. And to do that, I'm gonna access the beat transform. So I'm gonna look for the beat. Transform beat is what it's called. And this will give you this beat information. And in order to see this playing, you need to activate the timeline up here. So the transport information. And if you don't see this, you can access this if you go to View and Show Transport. That should give you this window. And if you press play, you can see that, according to the tempo, you will see the beats triggering here. So to the 16th notes, I want to have a random value. So I'm going to look for the random. And this generates, as you can see here in the output, some random values that we can use to trigger to change our transform. But this is just a single float value, and we need, a float too, because we have X and Y position. So I actually have to create a new node, a float 2. And here I can define which one I want to access. So in this case, first I want to start with the horizontal lines that should move across the Y-axis, right? So the X is going to be 0, and the Y is going to change here. So now let me drag that into the translate node, the transform node, and you can see that this is now animating. Now, what you can also see is that the range is still off because it's only moving from the middle to the top. And this is because the minimum and maximum in the random are set from 0 to 1. And we want to change this to something a bit more extreme. And I want to go outside of the screen just so to have a little bit more randomness. So sometimes they even disappear. So I'm going to set this to -2 and 2. And so that way we kind of have this disappearing and appearing lines. And that's nice. And so right now we have one single line, but in order to create multiple, it's actually really easy because you can just create another instance of this whole thing by adding an instance right here. So instead of 1, we can set it to 2. And you can already see that now we have two lines that are, getting different random positions. So they're basically being duplicated. And what I want to have is 3 lines in total. And the nice thing about this is that I can even set different values and different ranges for the individual instances. So in fact, let me go in here, select the random, go into this settings here. And if I click this icon right here, I can set different ranges for instance 0, 1, and 2. And so the first one I want actually from -1 to 1. The second one is going to be -1.5. And the third one is going to be -2. So that was the minimum range. And then for the maximum range, I'm going to do the same thing. So 1, 1.5, and 2. And so that way, it's just adding a little bit more variation to, for one line will always be visible and always stay kind of inside of the screen, and then the other one will get out of it. And so that way, it just adds a little bit more variation to the whole thing. So that's nice. Now, I just want to do the same thing for a vertical line, which is quite easy because I just have to select all of those nodes starting with the random and ending with the transform. I'm going to copy them and paste them in here. And that just gives me a second set of all of those same nodes that we just added. Now, I'm going to drag this 16th nodes in here again. I'm going to leave the values. Those are fine. Now here I want to change it from Y to X, right? Because now we want to access the X position. And then also the line, I'm just going to copy those values into the Y field right here. And so now you can see if I go into the transform, you can already see that my lines are moving. And to combine those, we can just add a video mixer at the end. So I'm just going to click here, video mixer. And I'm going to take the horizontal ones into the layer 2 and the other ones into the layer 1. And at the end of every patch, you always need this texture out node. So I'm just going to add this here, texture out, and this will be kind of the final output that you can also, that will be the output inside of Resolume. So yeah, this is kind of the base setup. And now let's create the input values so we can actually control the parameters inside of Resolume. Now, the first one that I want to access is the first one that I want to access are toggling the horizontal and vertical lines on and off. And so at the very beginning, I kind of always want to create the input nodes as a single kind of row here so I can see all of the inputs that I created. So I'm going to click at the beginning here and I need a Boolean in. So this is the input node actually for the Boolean. And again, I'm going to call this horizontal and just copy and paste that. Call the second one vertical. And then I'm going to drag the horizontal one to the layer 1 or layer 2 in this case because it goes from bottom to the top, and then the vertical to the respective layer. So if I toggle these on and off, you can see that this is activating the horizontal and the vertical lines. So the second one is going to be a integer in to control the amount of lines that we have. And I want a minimum of 1, so there's at least 1 line visible at all times, and then the maximum should be 3. And I'm going to call this amount. And I want to drag this into the instances tab input here. Now you can see that these have different shapes, and I in fact cannot just connect those because this is an attribute and this is a signal. And so I want to change this here to an attribute, and that way you can see that it has the same shape. And now it's also possible to just input that in here. So you can see 1 and 3. So now we can change the amount of lines. Perfect, that's exactly what we want. Let me just decrease the tempo a little bit so it's just not going that crazy for the moment. Now, the next thing that we want to control is the thickness of our lines. So let me create a new float in. In fact, what I want to do is in between this and the actual parameter, I want to insert a curve node because I want a little bit more control over the thinner values of the line but still have the possibility to go very thick. So I'm going to add a curve to make it to make the curve not linear but actually quadratic. So once I change this value towards the end, there is like the value increases more, right? So I'm gonna leave the input right here normalized from 0 to 1. And then here I'm gonna actually change the range to which I want to set the line thickness. And I always want a minimum of thickness. So I will change this to a very small value like 0.05. And then the maximum should be something like 0.2. And then I'm gonna drag this into the thickness of each one of those lines. And so now you can see that I have a lot of control over kind of the thinner values, but at the end it also gets very thick, which maybe for, some part could also be nice, but of course you can play around with those values however you want. And anything else? Well, what we could add to all of this is maybe a smoothing. So let me just make some space at the end here. So I'm just gonna drag all of this a bit more to the right. And so where I want to add this is actually after the float 2. So if I make some space here and then right click the wire and insert a smooth node, this allows me to create kind of the smoothing animation. I'm gonna also do the same thing for the vertical ones. And then I'm gonna create a float in to control the actual duration. So just input that in the duration here and then set the maximum. Let's see what could be a nice value. I guess I need to go back to my original tempo just to really be able to see it. I guess 1 is fine because then it gives me some wiggle room, so I'm just gonna leave that at that for now, which could be good. Also, I forgot to name the thickness, so just labeling everything to also have these labels in Resolume, and then I'm also gonna label this smooth node. And in fact, at the end, I'm gonna select all of those and change the color to something green, just so it's different from the other nodes, so I can see that these are actually my inputs. In fact, you can also just create a new comment and call that input. And then I also want to turn off this fill because that's just very strong color. It's a bit too strong for my taste. And just select those and outline those so it's a bit more clear. So in the end, to actually open this up in Resolume, we need to go to the patch settings up here, and you can give it a name. So I'm gonna call it Lines Dancing Tutorial version 2, and you need to give it a category, otherwise it won't show up in any of the tabs in Resolume. So I'm gonna give this a source category because it's actually a source and not an effect. And here we can also change the resolution. So let's just change it to 4K by default. And yeah, the thumbnail we can add as a snapshot. So maybe let's just kind of set it to the maximum of stuff that's going on. Go back into the patch and select. It doesn't work. Just check. So I guess you have to select the texture node, texture out node, or some node where there's something going on. And then go here to plus snapshot. And so this will create a snapshot of the current state. So yeah, this is fine for me. I'm just gonna save this and head into Resolume to check if I can see it. So now in Resolume, if I go to my sources and the wire sources, you can already see that the lines dancing tutorial source is showing up. And there we go. We have all of the effects that we created and the inputs, and we can change those here. So now you can, MIDI map them inside of Resolume and play this according to the music. And so yeah, it's a simple effect. It's quite quick and easy to set up, but it really gives you kind of a fundamental overview of how to set up anything in Wire. And I think, it's quite cool. I put the file is also available on my Patreon if you want to check that out. And yeah, so have fun creating, and I'll see you in the next one.